Welcome back. I'm Poppy Harlow in New York, and this afternoon, 8,000 Starbucks stores across the country will close to train employees on racial bias. This all stems from an incident last month that sparked nationwide uproar. Two black men, Dante Robinson, Rashawn Nelson, were arrested in a Philadelphia Starbucks. The store manager called the police after the men said they were in the store just 2 minutes without placing an order. They were there to meet a friend. The backlash was swift. It sparked many to talk of a Starbucks boycott. Starbucks apologized, condemned the actions of the store manager, and this morning, Starbucks has taken out a full-page ad in the New York Times, USA Today, Philadelphia newspapers from the Chairman Howard Schultz, calling what happened to these two men reprehensible, vowing this will be a new chapter in the company's history. And Howard Schultz is with me. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Poppy.
Howard, you said when this happened, you were personally ashamed, embarrassed, and you said we were wrong in every way. Can you say definitively these two men were arrested and the police were called because they were black?
I can absolutely say that of all the incidents and situations in the almost 50 years of history at Starbucks, this situation was not only reprehensible, but we were ashamed, horrified, and I think it's totally inconsistent with the values and guiding principles and the humanity of the company. And that's why we've taken such a swift action, immediately going to Philadelphia, meeting with the two young men, apologizing, and then asking ourselves, in view of what took place, we have a responsibility, a moral obligation to look at this and realize we need to advance the training about the issues that the country is facing and what is happening in our stores.
So that will happen today. 8,000 Starbucks stores across the country are going to be closed all afternoon.
Yeah.
You're going to train 175,000 workers on anti-bias training. Some of that is going to be showing them this documentary by the legendary documentary filmmaker Stanley Nelson, which I watched part of it, where you have young black men and women talking about wanting to walk out of a house and feel as safe as any white person would feel. You're going to have the woman Sherilyn Ifill, who heads the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, participating in this training. What will actually happen?
Well, first off, I've gone through the training myself,
Okay.
as has the entire leadership team of the company last week. And we did that so that we could experience it firsthand. It's interactive. It's been co-authored by Brian Stevenson, Sherilyn Ifill, Heather McGee. And I think we wanted to try and really get professional people to help us understand and walk in the shoes of people of color and understand that racial bias does exist. Unconscious bias exists, and what can we do as a company to create the reference points to establish empathy and compassion and a welcoming environment for everyone.
For critics who say this is an afternoon, how on earth can you tackle racial bias and unconscious bias in an afternoon?
Well, I think the most important thing to do is we need to have the conversation. We need to start. We realize that 4 hours of training is not going to solve racial inequity in America or anyone coming into our stores that may have a problem, but we have to start the conversation. We've also said that we are deeply committed to this being a long-term journey in which we are going to integrate this training not only in every Starbucks store from this point on, but also the onboarding of 100,000 new people a year.
So this is the beginning of more trainings to come?
Yes, without question, and we're going to do this around the world.
What was the gut? Howard, I've interviewed you for, I don't know, almost a decade now, right? And this company is as ingrained in you, arguably, as almost as family. You are Starbucks. Starbucks is you in many ways. So can you just tell me your gut? What did you feel when you realized this happened to these two men because of their race?
I was personally horrified by it. When you think about the values of Starbucks, providing health insurance, free college tuition, the things we've done for Opportunity Youth, veterans, refugees, all of these things, for this to happen is such an anathema. However, it did happen. And we did not blame the manager. We took full responsibility. I took full responsibility, immediately went to Philadelphia. But from a personal level, it was hard for me to actually imagine this could happen at Starbucks. And in a way, because it did happen.
Why is it hard for you to imagine it could happen at Starbucks? You think of sort of on every corner, and you think about race relations in this country. I mean, there was a poll last year that showed that 70% of Americans feel like race relations have gotten worse in the last decade.
Because the culture and values of the company are so steeped in compassion and humanity. 40% of our workforce are people of color. We've hired over 100,000 opportunity youth over the last couple of years. So we are steeped in an understanding of inclusion and diversity as part of the history of Starbucks.
So I think some people watching this right now might look and say, what does he, Howard Schultz, a very wealthy white executive, know about discrimination? What they don't know is that you were born and raised very poor in a very tough part of Brooklyn. You're a Jewish American. Have you lived discrimination?
Well, it's interesting you should ask that question, because part of going through the training is for each one of us in an intimate fashion to share our personal life experience. It's our personal life experience that has shaped whether or not we have bias. I grew up in a building with 100 families, with one elevator, 100 apartments of a very diverse group of people: white, black, Italian, Jewish, Puerto Rican, Cuban, and we all had to get along. I did not see color as a kid. And I think one of the reasons why this is such an anathema to me is because the entire company's history is based on the fact that we are all in this together, and the inclusion of Starbucks is part of the success of the company.
Were you discriminated against?
I was not discriminated against as a kid. When I went to school in Michigan, I was the only Jew in my dorm. Kids had never met a Jewish person, but I did not suffer discrimination.
In 2015, Starbucks launched the Race Together campaign. This was after the killings of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Eric Garner here in New York, and the ensuing protests. And you have admitted, I mean, it's when people wrote the baristas Race Together on the cups. That program ended, you admitted that it failed, and you talked about Americans being so uncomfortable talking about race. But you're doing it again. You're talking about race. You're closing your stores to do it. Is corporate America too scared to talk about race overall?
You know, what I've said publicly, and I've said this consistently, I said, given the polarization in Washington and the political class of dysfunction that we have experienced for years, that corporations, businesses, and business leaders have a moral obligation today to do much more for their employees and the communities they serve. And race should be a subject that we should be able to talk about, even though it's difficult.
But are they doing it enough overall?
I mean, obviously not. And I think, what we're doing today is historic. There's no company in America that has ever done anything quite like this.
How much will it cost Starbucks?
This will be tens of millions of dollars.
Tens of millions.
And it's interesting, I got a call from an institutional shareholder complaining that this is a expense that Starbucks should not make.
Yeah.
And what I said was, no, this is not an expense. This is an investment in our people and in our community.
It's also a call you got years ago when you started giving health care to more part-time workers.
Same kind of situation.
There's a really interesting opinion piece on CNN.com right now. It was written by Jesse Williams, the actor and activist, and also Judith Brown Dianis, the executive director of advancement of the project's national office. Here's what it reads. While Starbucks has taken steps to use last month's incident as a teachable moment for countless employees, these occurrences will continue. The rhetoric from the White House has exacerbated the problem, opening the door to increased overt racist behavior. Are they right?
I don't think what they're stating, I think, has contributed to the problem, but I think the totality of the issue is beyond the White House.
So has President Trump's rhetoric personally on race exacerbated racism in America?
I would say on a personal level, it probably has given license to people to feel as if they can emulate and copy the kind of behavior and language that comes out of this administration. But having said that, the racial divide and the inequities that exist between people of color and Caucasians in America is a problem that has existed for quite some time. Yeah. And I think we have to ask ourselves a very important question, and that is what kind of country do we want to live in? And from my perspective, we want to live in a country in which we love and respect every American. And you have to ask yourself about the promise of America and the American dream. And if it's not available to everybody, if people feel as if the color of their skin or their station in life is not going to provide them the same opportunity as someone who's white and who has a better zip code,
right,
then the country is not going to succeed in terms of its long-term aspirations.
Economic disparity,
yes.
The lack of social mobility, the upward dream that so many people live, that you lived, coming from East New York,
I mean,
Brooklyn.
I'm the poster child of the American dream.
Is there anything, and I know you've been critical of this administration, but I wonder if you think there is anything that the Trump administration can do, Howard, to help? You're doing what Starbucks is doing today. It's going to cost you tens of millions of dollars. What could the White House do to help close the divide?
You know, it may sound a little trite, but I mean it in a very heartfelt way. And I would just say, let's put humanity in the center of our conversation. And if the White House and the president would view through the lens of humanity the policies that I think are so important to the future of the country, whether it's immigration, whether it's trade, all of these things have such rhetoric to it, and the political class is not helping. I mean, we're sitting today, as an example, with almost $21 trillion of debt.
Yep.
In addition to that, almost $500 billion of interest expense. We can't function as a country if the environment domestically is under such pressure.
But so here's what the president points to, right? He'll point to the lowest unemployment rate we've seen in decades. He points specifically to African American unemployment is now down to 6.6%. It's higher than white unemployment. It's the lowest it's been since 1972. Does he deserve credit for that? Like he claims?
Well, I think when you have 5 million young Americans, opportunity youth who are not in school, not in work, many of which are people of color, when you have almost 45% of households in America that don't have $400 for an emergency, when you have a mental health crisis in America, when you have a homeless crisis in America. Let's go a different way. The most respected, trusted institution in the United States today is the United States military. And yet, at the same time, probably the poster child for the worst government agency, which is a $200 billion budget agency, is the VA.
The VA.
How do you square that up?
Yeah.
And so let's take a step back from the politics and the rhetoric and let's ask ourselves, how can we be servant leaders and how can we serve the American people in a way in which everyone has a shot at the promise of America?
Let me ask you about trade, because China is your second largest market outside of the United States. It's critically important for Starbucks. It's critically important for the U.S. economy and U.S. jobs, given the reciprocal trade that we do. The White House just moments ago this morning has announced a 25% tariff on $50 billion worth of Chinese goods. Are you concerned about that? Are you concerned it will exacerbate what is already the beginning, many say, of a trade war? What does that mean?
Let's take Starbucks out of the equation for a moment. In the history of the country, especially over the last 50 years, every time that we have had a conflict of trade and there have been trade wars, it has resulted in a downturn of the economy of the United States. This is a policy that is not correct. And
so it doesn't help U.S. jobs?
No, it doesn't help U.S. jobs, and it's political rhetoric and kind of metaphorically, and this is what I really believe. The country and America should not be building walls of any kind. We should be building bridges. We should be creating our opportunity of trust and confidence with our allies all over the world and building bridges with all of the countries in which we want to do business with. This is not the approach we should be taking.
Is 2020 out of the question for you, Howard Schultz?
Are we going to go there again?
As someone who talks about, in any way, not just as president, is there any way that serving in the government is still in your mind come 2020?
What I would say is that I'm as concerned an American citizen as I ever have been. I want to be as involved as I possibly can as a citizen to help the country. I don't know what that's going to mean in the future.
I appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Howard.
Thank you.
Thank you.